All right, so we're live, and me and Steve were just having a chat about which episode number this is, and we've already forgotten. So we decided we're just not going to do episode number because that makes it more casual. That's our excuse, and we're sticking to it. So it's been a big week in the last week with things in the news, and Steve's got a few things that he wants to chat about. And I was also at London Tech Week last week as well, so I've got a few things to mention about that. But Stephen, do you want to start off with what you thought the big news of the week was?
Yeah, I think something I've been wanting to chat to you about is the drama going on at Reddit at the moment. I'm sure you've been keeping tabs with it, but it touches on some interesting topics, but maybe worth for anyone unaware. The overview of the drama is that Reddit's CEO now wants to charge for third-party developers to use their API access, and I think that was announced sometime in April. And nobody batted an eyelid about it until recently. An app called Apollo, that is the biggest sort of alternative interface to use Reddit, like a sort of copycat platform, estimated that it would cost it around $20 million a year to run, and immediately announced it would shut down before the changes came into play, which I think is the 30th of June. And so in response, a lot of the top subreddits have been going dark, which I think is their word of saying private, which means you can't access, me and you can't go into Reddit and access the forum unless we're one of the people that have been allowed in as like a user. And so it's been quite crazy to watch. I was reading the Verge interview with the CEO the other day, and that was his chance to sort of calm the waters, and instead he doubled down. I think the quote was, he said something like all blow-ups on Reddit, this one will pass. So he's pretty adamant that the users will accept and it'll all go back to normal with him making some money.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? Because I think same thing with Twitter, right? It's basically ChatGPT, which has triggered this in some ways, right? Because
scraping the
all
data.
of Reddit was, so Reddit got scraped and Reddit trained all of these models. So ChatGPT being worth as much as it is partly because they used all of Reddit's data for free. And I can understand from Reddit's perspective in a way, it's like, is that really fair that they're the ones who are paying all the server costs? I don't know if you know, I don't imagine Reddit doesn't make a huge amount of money. It's probably not that profitable. So Reddit is the ones.
I have to Google that one. I would imagine not, no.
Yeah, so if they're paying for this stuff and then other companies coming and making money off it, it kind of makes sense to charge them, right? And it's hard to do that in a fair way, right? Because like you said, if all of these subreddits are going dark, you basically lose your product. So how do you charge at the right level? And the other interesting thing is that it's not actually the moderators that are directly being affected by the API, from what I understand, is that they're using the apps that other people have built. So to me, the obvious thing is just Reddit just builds whatever the app was. Like, why doesn't Reddit just build whatever Apollo was for moderators? And they must have the resources to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think Apollo is more like, what's the one for Twitter? Like TweetDeck, I think is what it was called. So it's just another way to use the official app, but not use the official app. So I think the Reddit CEO got fed up knowing that I think around 1 million users a day use that app instead of the official one. And I think he has 2 tiers of charging for the Apollo app. I'm not sure how much at all he makes. But as I was saying to you off air, with that estimated 20 million, you would think with 1 million users, maybe $20 a year, that she covered it. So clearly, not enough people want to pay to use apps. And I think that's a really interesting point this is touching on. And I think Twitter's going through the same problem with the sort of Twitter Blue subscription. People are not that keen on paying for something that's always been free.
Yeah, it's a tactic a lot of companies use, right? So one of the things a lot of grocery places in the UK have done, or even Amazon, they've given free delivery, right? Which, when you do free delivery, it's a loss-making thing in order to get customers. But the problem is now, like when they have to start cutting costs and things aren't as rosy as they were before, you now want to charge for that. But everyone's like, well, how can we charge for this? And it's something to be very careful of when you do that kind of loss leader idea, because what do you then do, right? Because now you've got people hooked in on the idea that they're getting something for free, and now they're not. And Yeah, it is. I feel it's an interesting challenge of with the Apollo app is that he was obviously making money based on using the Reddit API for free, and it is the Reddit API from a private company. Is that a public good that people like make money out of it for free? So it'd be interesting to see because if this guy, I haven't looked into it fully, but like if people know in the audience, like if this guy was making say 10 million a year with quite low costs because all of the costs were basically borne by Reddit, he's had a pretty sweet deal for a while now, right? So it's going to be interesting to see a bit more about the story because what seems very clear is that Reddit users and Reddit moderators very clearly seems to have taken the side of the people who are annoyed about the API, right, with the Apollo and things like that. So they're obviously well informed of what's going on. So there's probably something else to this that we maybe aren't familiar with. And why is that the case? Because you think, like, from a business angle, if you've got a trove of data and that data is valuable, then giving it to people for free who are then going to make money out of it. It's, for example, if it's universities, right? If university was using this for like data to like do something for the public good, fair enough. If somebody's building an app from it to make money out of it, then it's part of the cost of business, right? It's not altruistic. Understand?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out this morning why everyone's so upset about it. Someone made a point that I think they don't want their data scraped. They don't want their data being used to train chatbots either. But I think it's because they know that Reddit, when they start charging for the API, is just them buying their data anyway. Like someone's taking their data, and I think they're just.
Yeah.
It seems to me that they just would prefer it almost not to be the CEO. They prefer it to be third-party app makers who are, in a way, making the site better because I think they all like the tools that these people are making.
Yeah, it's even like most people listening have used Reddit before, right? And you do wonder as well. Reddit's a massive company that's been known for years. Why? How come they haven't improved some of the basic UX and UI stuff? Right? Like you can create different functions with power users. It's not like a basic beginner startup where they don't have the resources. They've got the resources to make everything that these other apps are doing, but they're choosing not to do it. And it's interesting to understand that logic of when you have these big resources, you have such huge like traffic. But why aren't they reinvesting that in some of those elements to make these users happy?
Yeah, it's also interesting. I think you can again compare to Twitter with the sort of freemium versus premium stuff. Like Musk just assumed that if he added features behind the paywall, people would sign up immediately, and the uptake's been slow. I wonder if Reddit's ever considered similar, like a paid tier to be on the platform.
I think like there was this whole move a few years ago, right, towards all the subscription models, and the problem is now that everybody has 1 million subscriptions, so you just don't really like, especially with the cost, like in the UK, the cost of living crisis, all this kind of stuff. You don't really want to see more and more lines on your bank statement of money going out, and when you just pay a one-off thing, it's like, okay, that's how much I paid. Whereas the creep of every month paying for 10 subscriptions, 20 subscriptions, I think there's a fatigue of that as well, especially when it's something before you're getting free. So it's like, okay, now I get these extra features I don't really want, or I could get for free before, and now I have to pay more, and every month it's kind of coming out, and it changes it, right? It's always the same case of when it's whether they were charging like $1 a month or $10 a month, it goes from that mental switch from this something I just access for free on the web versus, oh, now it's a purchasing decision. And maybe a lot of these apps and a lot of these people have underestimated how much friction there is for that.
Yeah, I mean, I always assumed that the subscription model would work, especially for social media sites. I think it's hard to judge with Twitter because of the animosity towards Musk. I think there's been a line drawn in the sand where people just will not pay him directly money. But I did always assume that made sense to me. Something like Instagram. I can't see why people wouldn't pay $4.99 a month to access everything Instagram offers, or maybe access more features on top of the standard.
I guess with Instagram, because you've got the Instagram, it gets a bit confusing because of the Meta side of things, right? Because they've got Meta Business Suite, and the Meta Business Suite is where you can pay for features that it's like adverts and stuff like that, right? So why businesses pay, I think makes sense. With Twitter and even with Reddit, it's a bit of an odd one because it's mainly users as opposed to businesses. Now, businesses can use it too, but usually it's personal brand based. Whereas in Facebook and Instagram, people tend to do a bit more. I say that even with Reddit, you do see the ads, but who scroll past them. So I guess that's not a great case. Anyway, I obviously do realize they have got business stuff there as well. And it's just interesting to see what's going to happen there because we've got so used to accessing the web for free, but part of that was basically paid for by venture capitalists who are pumping in the money to these companies, which were loss making. And now they seem a bit less willing to do that. These companies are now having to try and cover their own costs. And it's interesting is social media a social good which should be funded by other people, or is it a product that we should be paying for? And it's not looking good for the people who are saying, yeah.
It's interesting. I think we're sort of starting to see that maybe this is the end of the social media era of the internet. They're slowly losing their way. And I read someone tweet this morning that perhaps with what's going on with Reddit and the other companies trying to sort of, pay gate their data, that if this is perhaps the end of the open internet, as we call it, everything is accessible mainly for free. The content is mainly provided for free. And maybe this is this first sort of test of, or not test, maybe something's coming in the next stage, or maybe a lot more of the internet is behind paywalls, or companies only offer so much out for free now.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it comes at the same time as ChatGPT and OpenAI, which is going the opposite direction. So it's two opposing forces. Because I guess if I was a social media owner right now, I'd be pretty annoyed that ChatGPT is going to make a ton of money off my content that I had to pay for the service and I had to pay for I had to do all the user acquisition, all that kind of stuff, and then they're not maybe being able to convert their users, which they thought they had loyalty to, but those same users are buying ChatGPT, and it's a weird thing, right? Because ChatGPT can only really work if there's a lot of open source information. If everybody starts putting this stuff behind paywalls to stop that from happening, then ChatGPT becomes a lot less useful itself. And it's also about quality of information, right? So you think about, for example, the news. A lot of the top news sites, if they're behind paywalls, then where does ChatGPT have to get some information from? The less credible sites instead. And we see that with the quality of information sometimes, where it's not quite as good as you might hope for.
So I'm maybe a bit dumb in that sense, but a large language model is always learning. I know ChatGPT stops at 2021 or something. But if everything was put behind a paywall now, would that just imply that the ChatGPT could never learn anything new?
So you couldn't. So I think, for example, with new information, right? So it could have access to all the old information, but say current events-based stuff, it would have to rely on, say, Twitter and sources which maybe are less credible. Whereas because it couldn't go to, you're also always going to have the BBC and things like that, which you'd expect to always be open. But let's say there's some new scientific breakthrough, but all of that's behind a paywall. It's a challenge now, because how, obviously not everything can go behind a paywall. That's extreme. But in different circles, let's say in the tech circles, right, a lot of stuff is now you have to sign up to get access to it, especially the more credible places, right? In Europe, we've got Sifted, right, where you can read a couple of articles for free, and after that you have to register. So I'm assuming that ChatGPT can't scrape the data that's behind that paywall. Or I don't know how they'll be able to do that, if they can. But then if that's the number one source of information about Europe-based tech, then how does that work as well?
Yeah, that's interesting, because obviously these models are already being trained to such an extent that maybe it's too late to start even thinking about preventing them scraping data. It's maybe too late. They work to quite a good level already, but maybe we're touching on something that's maybe what the future holds, and you're just going to have to pick 2 or 3 things that you use and pay for them.
If I go back to London Tech Week last week, it was quite interesting. So it was held in London, obviously, like opposite the Houses of Parliament. So speakers-wise, you had Rishi Sunak, who's the British Prime Minister. You had the London Mayor. You had the Leader of the Opposition. You had the Business Secretary. You had the Innovations. So you had all of the top ministers across every level of government all coming there and pretty much all saying how AI is the future. UK is going to be the home of AI. So we've got Google DeepMind here, for example. So again, he was on stage. What was interesting from somebody who follows it quite regularly is just that there's quite a lack of new information. I was expecting a bit more in terms of here's exactly what's happening, where it seemed like more of a political event rather than say, I was expecting more all these innovative companies coming out and they can do like an Apple VR thing, right? Here's our new product, here's that's going to change the world. And I was expecting something a bit more on those lines. So while it was very cool to see these people speak, it was very much about a case of making the case of why London is a hub for AI in particular, which I won't share the political propaganda that was there. So a lot of it made sense, and it's quite interesting to see what the different schemes have got in place. But obviously, most people listening right now are going to be from the States. And it's interesting to see as well, like different things going on in the UK tech scene. And it's becoming a little hub. So you've got A16Z moving across here as well, which like they made the announcement, I think, to coincide with London Tech Week. But I think it's a case of people trying to look further afield for their returns now, because with kind of the general funding scene drying up a bit, it makes it a lot harder. But the other interesting thing that came out a lot was how AI is the future, but AI needs to be regulated. And we're going to be trustworthy at the same time. And it's that interesting balance. What you see the politicians, everybody juggling is, we really want AI to come to the UK or come to their country because that's where the innovation is going to happen. But at the same time, it's quite scary in terms of how quickly it's growing. And while we have access to it, while we can do things very quickly and learn from it, we don't really know where the economy is going to be in 2 years, 3 years' time. We don't know about jobs. So that's what the Leader of the Opposition came in and talked about how there has to be a really big focus on jobs, because it's great for say tech innovators, say like us or people in this space, because maybe we can use that to grow our business quicker. But let's say you're a software engineer. If you can, there's Copilot, for example, with things like GitHub at the moment, which can make you faster. But what happens if it's a case of you being faster means that they only need 2 engineers rather than 3, or they try to cut costs in that way? And some skills are quite highly skilled. Some jobs are quite highly skilled and now at risk, which wasn't the true case before, right? Before it was like, okay, people knew, for example, with self-driving cars, that delivery drivers would be lost. And people can be quite blasé about that because they're not a delivery driver. Whereas now it's coming for the jobs which is supposedly safer, higher skilled jobs, which people think, oh, I'm going to study for years in order to get good at this job, say like lawyers, and it's coming after that too. So I think that debate is really interesting, because even with like me and you and anybody listening, how do you protect yourself in that economy where even if you're smart, even if you're good, that somebody else in AI can do your job better than you can? There's obviously going to be new jobs created as well, like prompt engineers and things like that. But it's just such an unknown and uncertainty that I do think it has to be quite an important part of like how things are worked out. And if it does make a lot of people redundant, how do you keep them engaged? How do you keep their lives fulfilling?
Did they have any sort of brief overview on how they would tackle that, or was it just lots of that needs to be spoken about, but we have no answers?
It would be based on principles, which is interesting. Okay. So quite political speak, but the idea is what they're trying to basically do is keep very in touch with the tech scene and have a good idea of what's coming up and what's coming out soon, so they can be quite agile about it. But it's just, I think everything has moved a lot faster than any of us had expected in the last year or so. And the other thing, which there was a talk as well about quantum computing. And that was quite interesting, because I always think that's the dark horse of the innovation world that a lot of people underestimate. So with quantum computing, the basis of it, and this wasn't explained especially well, so I might be messing this up here, is that the people so binary is obviously 0 and 1s, right? Whereas if it's quantum, it can be 0, 1, and also 0 and 1 at the same time, which means that calculation can be done much faster, like exponentially faster, which means that all of the encryption we have is basically useless once it's fully active. But it also means that when calculation can be done much quicker, combined with AI, think about like language learning models learning at the pace they are, but when they could also use quantum computing to do that, then in say 2 or 3 years' time, we have these hyper-powered AI like models. And what effect does that have? Where we're seeing it grow so quickly at the moment, but what about when the computing power is massively advanced, or things that used to take a day to work out now only take 10 seconds? So it's kind of interesting to see how the innovations have at such a lightning pace. And for example, like for the entrepreneurs listening, how do you prepare for an environment like that, right? Because you've got let's say you're trying to raise funding and you're saying, okay, this is our milestones for like next year, year after, in 5 years' time, this is where we want to be. But all of a sudden, the complete environment is totally changed where somebody else decides to jump into quantum before you did. And then now your product is just worthless because they jumped you. And it's interesting, like, puzzles to think about.
I can't stop thinking about the Ant-Man film. The moment you said quantum, it's a quantum realm.
Yeah.
I think what we'll see a whole lot of pivoting, I think. And some of it will be genuine and some of it will be following the money. I think the UK government could even be guilty of that, no? Because I thought the chat a few years ago was about becoming the home of crypto. And there was even chat about the UK government coming up with its own coin of some form.
I think that's still kind of the case. So with A16Z, is like Andreessen Horowitz, they're coming in particular for blockchain. And then like even in the UK scene, for example, so I know somebody called Jay Gadral who's running a Block Dojo, so it's an accelerator. And 24% of companies that have been funded in the UK in the blockchain have come from his accelerator. So there is a lot of movement happening, which maybe hasn't made it over to the States yet or isn't as widely publicized. But there is a lot of things going on in the crypto space still here. And for me, it was interesting to kind of tap into that market because I wasn't really familiar with it as much here. But there is a lot of people working on different projects. And it's interesting. It's almost underground in a way. You don't necessarily see it in the news very much. Like the average person in the UK won't see crypto all the time in the news. But there is quite a big tech scene here and startup scene here working on a lot of different projects. And there's even somebody who I know who's the first FCA regulated house has been put on the blockchain. So FCA for the Americans is like Financial Conduct Authority. So it's basically a regulator saying like it's now officially legal to put houses on the blockchain and to have that register there. And the main benefit is that it allows fractional. So people can own percentages of a house and be able to trade percentages of a house. And the idea is that opens up alternative investments. So that's a company called Control All. And by doing that, the idea in theory is that now it's a lot easier for people to diversify their portfolios. Whereas most people only really have access to stocks and shares. Now you can also have access to real estate or other things that people normally only get access to through hedge funds. So there is actually a lot of innovation going on in crypto space in the UK, but I don't think that often makes it across the pond where people know about what's been happening.
That's quite interesting. Anytime I write about crypto, or anytime I used to write about crypto, I haven't in a while, a common answer was putting houses on the blockchain. That was a common use case that was argued for. A lot of people were saying that was also so you could log everything from like repairs, work done, anything that's been bought into it, removed, etc., so that when people went to view it, they could see like this ledger of, or just a ledger that explains the entire house, I guess.
Yeah, because there's a few different ones I've seen because I've been to some of these pitch days, right? Where you see these different companies trying to raise money for their startups, and like there is the ones who do the same thing for cars, for example, right? Where each car has like a register where everything you do to that car gets added. Because obviously some people buy these cars and then they say, oh, it's had this done, had that done, and whatever. It's like, you can't really tell. So it's quite good in a way to see that kind of information. And I think the best use of crypto, and I think we probably both agree into blockchain wise, is it's not when it's, oh, I like the blockchain, what can I use it for? Versus, oh, here's a problem, what's the best way to fix it? And that's where housing, for example, in the UK, like you've obviously bought a house as well, it's an absolute pain to go through the process, all the different forms. Is that your wake up time? So that is interesting to see where that goes. And with the UK scene, it's growing. It's still, I think, quite far behind the States. But yeah, there's a lot going on there. But who knows? Maybe we'll create the next Reddit or something like that will happen.
I think you nailed it just there. I think, as I touched on, I think if well, the US will be the same, but if the scene is going to keep switching, maybe AI. I don't know if quantum computing fits in the same bracket or if that becomes another sub thing. But as long as successful entrepreneurs do pivot, and that's okay. But I think we've already seen a lot of very disingenuous pivoting going on.
I feel like you're thinking about somebody in particular.
Oh, just many. I don't know. Everywhere across Twitter, everyone changed their strategy. Look at Meta changing its kind of strategy a little bit. The sort of metaverse has now been kind of down pegged a wee bit. Now they're going all in on AI. I think, it's going to be the same, but there will be a few that pivot. That will pivot to the Be Smart idea and are going to make some serious money, it would appear, from this quantum realm.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things as well. It's like you can see how many people have started making money off advising other people about AI. And I feel like the same thing will happen with quantum. The people who understand quantum early, and it's quite difficult to understand, they can make a lot of money because the same thing now. A lot of companies are scrambling because how do we make the best use of AI? Because if their competitors are, they're going to fall behind. And I think a similar thing will happen with quantum and like other big technological breakthroughs as well. The other one I didn't touch on as well was some of the biotech stuff going on and how AI is really impacting that. So with the new drugs being created, the new resistant, like when they're trying to find drugs that will break the resistance that some diseases have now, and also the genetic sequencing. So I think that's something which the UK has done pretty well on in terms of they've mapped the genome and we've got different projects here. But I think that's one of the most exciting spaces for me in terms of AI and how it's helping is that model of finding new drugs and understanding diseases better. And the innovation there seems to be going crazy as well, but it's just something which maybe isn't as focused on as much. So maybe even next week I kind of bring up some of the stories of that, but I think it's going to have to be time up now for today. Was there anything else I wanted to mention?
No, that's perfect for me. Yeah. That's a good overview of what's going on in the UK. Right, maybe so this is not just a bluster for a change. Maybe there's some genuine chance that the UK can put itself on a pedestal here.
Yeah, we'll see about that, but it's looking good. There's exciting stuff going on. But all right, well, that's a wrap, everyone. Thanks for listening, and make sure you subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, whatever you need to do. Take care.